Mark Wallace sat at his desk in the warehouse office, wondering what he should do with his wife, Willa. Before him lay evidence of her infidelity with her boss, Dale Timmons, owner of Timmons Electronics. This company produced small electronic controllers that allowed computers to control mechanical devices. Some were tiny and some were quite large, depending on the application. Mark was working at Timmons Electronics when he met Willa Miller and successfully won her hand in marriage. A few years later, he saw the need for independent warehouses, both dry and refrigerated, and, taking a risk, decided to open his own business. Willa wasn't thrilled with the idea, but she helped save where she could to support him. Now 35 years old, Mark was a successful businessman with 4 huge warehouses and another 100 acres of land to expand on the outskirts of their mid-sized town. A large retailer was looking for a new distribution center, and Mark's company was among the favorites to provide the site for a long-term lease. His cold storage warehouse was so large that it could accommodate 30 truckloads without problems and freeze meat from the local meatpacking plant directly into the trucks without unloading them. This saved many man-hours in unloading and then loading meat for delivery to distant markets. Throughout the work of launching the business, through the mac and cheese dinners when they couldn't even afford sausage, Mark and Willa were a team. They held the line, fighting to get the first warehouse completed and leased. Willa was Dale Timmons' personal assistant. At 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing about 130 pounds, her appearance was average. She was a natural brunette who sometimes added highlights to her gorgeous shoulder-length hair. Her breasts were full and attracted the attention of men who wanted to get closer and see how she would react to a little attention. Her legs were long and slender, and her buttocks were the perfect shape. Not too big, but not flat either. She and Mark had decided that they needed to get the business off the ground first before having children, and Mark was now ready for that. But Willa had shown little enthusiasm the last time they spoke. She was too busy at her job, her second most important job at Timmons Electronics. Although there were several vice presidents, Mark knew that Willa was the person who was relied upon to complete all tasks on time. Mark began to wonder why Willa changed her mind about children. At the beginning of their marriage, they discussed the number of children, their gender, and even names. Mark dreamed about Rachel, Mike, and Amy, but now Willa didn't even want to talk about it. Their sex life also changed. Mark understood that the frequency might decrease with age, but he was sure that his libido would decrease over time, while Willa's, on the contrary, would increase after 36 years. However, everything turned out the other way around. Mark's desire and need for physical intimacy remained as strong as in the early days of dating, but he could not remember the last time Willa was truly interested. Any intimacy occurred only after his persistent requests, and she simply let him do his thing, without any enthusiasm. After a few times like this, Mark simply stopped asking for sex. This led him to conclude that Willa was no longer interested in him. Every day, the distance between them grew greater. They hardly talked during meals, in the evening with the TV on, and certainly not at all before bed. Willa didn't seem to care about the success of the business as long as there was money in the account. The warehouse business was a separate corporation, wholly owned by the Wallaces, and had its own checking and even savings accounts. Mark took a set amount from each payment as their income. This allowed us to retain profits for business growth. Several years ago, Willa opened a separate checking account where her salary went. She paid many of the monthly expenses, and Mark covered the rest. Willa used her money for clothing, personal needs, and visits to salons and hairdressers. Mark decides to use a corporate account to pay a private investigator to investigate Willa's relationship with her boss, Dale Timmons. Since Willa never looked at these accounts and all the records were kept in the warehouse office, she would not have seen anything related to the investigation. Mark had known Dale for many years, first as an employee of Timmons Electronics and now as a supplier to that company. Dale rented part of one of Mark's warehouses to store the controllers before shipping, so they continued to have a business relationship, and Mark attended all Timmons Electronics employee events. Mark never suspected that Willa might be in a relationship with Dale, but he was the most likely candidate since they spent a lot of time together, including on business trips. As a result, Mark decided to take action and hired a private detective, which was the first step towards revealing the truth about his wife and, possibly, his future. Mark hired a private security agency that offered a full range of services, from cybersecurity to background checks and physical security of facilities. He called the owner Chris Couples. They agreed to meet, and Mark completed his current affairs, after which he went to the office of the security van company. Chris greeted him warmly and offered him a cup of coffee. After they got comfortable, Chris started talking. "Well, Mark, what brings you to my office today? Usually you just call if there are problems with my employees. Have you been hacked?" Mark grinned. "You could say that I was hacked." He raised his hand. "No, my warehouses are fine. The computers and network are also secure, as far as I can see." He took a deep breath. "It's about my wife, Willa. We are becoming more and more strangers. Our sex life is at zero. I want children, but she doesn't even want to discuss this topic. I have no evidence, but I suspect that she has someone else, and I am simply providing her with a house to live in." Chris took it seriously. Usually, if someone who has been married for a long time begins to suspect infidelity, this means that there really is a problem there. Of course, Mark could be wrong and Willa could be innocent, but practice suggests otherwise. Any investigation had to be carried out very carefully so as not to alarm Willa or completely destroy their marriage. I have several good detectives. In fact, the best one is a woman, and she does a great job. It seems she lives to expose unfaithful spouses. However, she does an excellent job of conducting any investigation. Her background checks are much more thorough than others, and she is excellent at recovering stolen insured items. Mark nodded, knowing that this woman, whoever she was, would be the perfect candidate for the task. Chris continued, "Who do you think could be her lover?" "There are no obvious signs, but the most likely candidate is her boss, Dale Timmons of Timmons Electronics." Chris might have guessed because he knew where Willa worked. There may be a slight conflict of interest. We provide security for Timmons Electronics. Dale has never really worried about other types of security, so we just patrol the area and check doors at night. He thought for a few moments and then made a phone call. "Lisa, is Tom in the office now?" There was a break. "Hello, Tom. This is Chris Couples. I have a quick question for you. Could there be a conflict of interest if one of my clients asks me to conduct a personal investigation regarding another client of mine? We are not talking about investigating the companies themselves, only about the employees." Another pause. "Okay, I understand. Thanks for the consultation." Chris hung up. "It was my lawyer. He said there could be a potential conflict of interest, but since the services were contracted by the companies and not their executives, there shouldn't be much of an issue. I hope you weren't planning on paying for the investigation through a corporate account." Mark was a little embarrassed. "I was actually thinking about it so Willa wouldn't see the bill. I will simply use some of my savings to pay for your services, and then there will be no connection to the business. If necessary, I can transfer money to my account to offset savings." Once the investigation was started, Mark felt some relief. Regardless of what is discovered, he will gain information about his wife, their marriage, and perhaps the future of their family. Mark did not immediately contact a divorce lawyer or go to the best local lawyers so that Willa could not hire one of the predators if it came to a divorce. He did not immediately transfer money from general accounts or move it to offshore accounts. No, he didn't do anything like that. He just went back to work. Life continued as before. The Wallaces coexisted, as they had for the past months. Mark and Willa shared a bed, but made little attempt to resume their intimate life. They still didn't talk much, and Mark didn't bring up the topic of children. He simply distanced himself and began to think about his future, in which there may no longer be a place for Willa. Chris provided regular updates, but his best detective was undercover, so there was no news for a long time. Chris informed Mark that his best private investigator was now working at Timmons Electronics, investigating the working relationship between Willa and her boss, Dale, as well as checking for any unusual business practices. Mark understood the need for a slow and methodical investigation, but was a little concerned about what might be discovered. Finally, after many months, the report was ready for Mark. He and Chris sat down to review the entire package of documents. It seemed like it was full. It contained transcripts of letters, messages, and telephone conversations. There were also videos from various business meetings outside the city. There was no doubt that Willa and her boss were indeed lovers. Some of the transcripts were particularly painful, as Willa made many derogatory remarks about Mark and his abilities as a lover. Chris was quick to point out that often unfaithful spouses scold their partners during sexting to numb the guilt. Mark now faced important questions regarding his marriage and, to some extent, his business. Willa was a co-owner of the company, and buying out her share could cost him too much. The local economy was booming, raising the cost of business. This was good for business, but extremely painful in case of divorce. Now he had to decide what to do next. Should he have confronted Willa and demanded her loyalty? Or just leave and start living separately? Maybe kick her out of the house, despite the possible consequences, such as selling the business? Or should he just ignore everything and hope that things will calm down over time? He also had to decide whether to tell Gretchen Timmons, Dale's wife, about everything. What if she files for divorce? Would Dale then actively try to get Willa to leave Mark? So many questions and so few clear answers. Mark thought about these questions, and it gave him a headache. A severe migraine was accompanied by nausea, and he wanted to hide in a dark, quiet room. Willa noticed that Mark was even more distant than usual, and the severe headache made her worry. That evening, surprisingly, she tried to show concern for her husband. She made him soup, and surprisingly, it didn't come from a can. She tried not to make any noise while Mark rested and checked on him from time to time. Mark appreciated the gestures, especially the making of the soup, but he couldn't help but wonder why Willa was suddenly showing concern now. When the headache subsided a little, Mark began to make plans. Even the craziest and most extreme plans seemed better than just being in the grief of knowing that his marriage was effectively over. He fell asleep pondering the details of his plan to expose his wife and her lover to the entire community. He decided not to tell Gretchen Timmons. Let her find out the truth when everyone else is faced with Willa and Dale's double life. The next morning, Mark woke up smiling, looking at the figure of his wife lying next to him in bed. He got up, shaved, and took a hot shower, then got dressed. Willa was just starting to wake up when Mark was ready to leave the bedroom and go to breakfast. "Rise and shine, dear. Thank you for everything you did last night. I feel great. I don't know where this terrible headache came from, but now it's gone, and I'm ready for the rest of my life thanks to you," he said, leaning down and kissing her on the cheek. Willa didn't answer, still trying to fully wake up, but she was surprised that her husband, who had been depressed lately and barely spoke to her, now seemed alert and full of life. Later she showered, got dressed, and joined Mark for coffee. Her breakfast was usually with Dale in his office. Sometimes they actually ate something, but most often Will had sex. Mark sat down with her and said that he was going to start building a new warehouse. The company, which had been on the fence about building a new distribution center, had yet to make a final decision, so plans for the project were put on hold. Mark explained to Willa that each of their warehouses was initially a risk, but now they are profitable. A huge new empty warehouse may not entice a large company to make a deal, but it may attract other firms looking for similar sites with access to highways and railroad tracks that make logistics easier. Willa had to give in and agree with Mark's plans, since he had been right in all decisions regarding the company so far. Wallace Warehouse was preparing for another expansion. Mark also needed construction to begin to make his plan more effective. He went to the office and called his deputy, Kelly Parsons, to begin organizing the construction work. He then called his lawyer and arranged to update his will. While he was in the lawyer's office, Mark also updated the company's succession plan in case he was no longer able to run the business for any reason. His lawyer had been pushing Mark to take this step for a long time, so this plan did not arouse suspicion. Willa would still remain the majority shareholder in the event of Mark's death or incapacity. However, it would have no influence on how the business would be run. She could make a profit, but Kelly would become the CEO and would only have to keep Willa informed of how things were going. Willa would be limited in her ability to withdraw money so that she could not empty the accounts and close the company. She could sell the business, but she couldn't destroy it. Now it's time for the rest of the plan. Mark gradually began withdrawing money from the company's accounts several $100s at a time. Within weeks, he had saved up about $10,000 for his intended escape. He didn't plan to disappear for long, just a week or two, but by the time he returned, all his plans should have worked. Mark visited a veterinary supply store and bought some syringe needles. He didn't need syringes, so it didn't raise suspicions. He also dressed like an ordinary farmer, which helped him pass unnoticed. He then began carefully searching the internet for information, using the public library so that no trace of his search would remain on his home or work computers. At home, Mark continued to smile and communicate with Willa. She reciprocated his feelings and even initiated several intimate moments. It was both pleasant and bitter for Mark at the same time. The realization that Willa remembered who her husband was belated. At the first intimacy, Mark hesitated whether he should refuse, but having no evidence of illness, he decided that he did not know when he would have the opportunity to release again, and therefore decided to enjoy it. Mark and Willa also attended the Timmins Electronics Spring Celebration. The event included a buffet, games for adults and children. Prizes were given out to the adult winners, and each child was given a small toy for participating. Mark tried not to drink too much alcohol because he wasn't sure he could stop himself from getting into a confrontation with Dale. He avoided serious conversations with him, but sat and chatted with Gretchen for a while before joining the other small groups. It was a good evening, although Willa disappeared with Dale for a while. Not surprisingly, upon returning home, Willa did not take the initiative for intimacy, and Mark did not insist on her. Meanwhile, construction of the new warehouse has reached the excavation phase to prepare the site for the pouring of the concrete foundation. It's time to start planning. One evening, after staying late in the office, Mark began the next stage of his plan. He used a needle purchased from a veterinarian to draw some of his own blood. Mark knew it would be difficult for him to cope with this, but he did it. He hoped that he wouldn't have to put on a band-aid at home so that Willa wouldn't notice the puncture mark. Now he had the first bag of blood to carry out his plan. Mark thought about using the blood of a freshly slaughtered cow or pig, but knowing that any laboratory could quickly perform a DNA test, he decided that it had to be his blood for the plan to work. To prevent the blood from clotting, he learned that an anticoagulant was needed. Initially, he was worried about where to get it, but then he found out that rat poison is essentially an anticoagulant. He bought a box of rat and mouse poisons from a local store and added some to the blood bag. Mark wasn't sure exactly how much to add, so he went through trial and error. He then placed the blood bag in the mini fridge in his office, which was locked so no one else could see inside. He thoroughly washed the needle and tube and hung them up to dry. After some time, Mark planned to take another pint of blood to fully realize his plan, but first he needed to recover. That evening, Mark moved on to the next stage of the plan. He went online and, under Willa's name and using her email, took out a new $1 million insurance policy on his life. The insurance only covered his life, leaving Willa out. He then began calling his and Willa's family members, as well as their friends and some of Willa's colleagues. Since he didn't have all the numbers he needed, Mark called Dale Timmins. "Hello, Dale. This is Mark Wallace. Can you do me a favor? Willa's birthday is coming up on the 18th in 3 weeks. I'm planning a surprise for her, a party at our house. Can you tell your employees about this?" Dale readily agreed. "Of course, Mark. Willa is a valuable employee and a wonderful person. I'm sure many of our people will be happy to come and make her happy. Need help with anything else?" Mark, pretending to be unaware of his wife's relationship, continued. "Yes, I have one request. Could you keep Willa at the office on her birthday and bring her home by 7? This will give guests time to come and hide. Dale agreed to support the idea, and Mark was confident that Willa would return home for her birthday with gifts from Dale. Over the next few days, Mark arranged a birthday present for Willa and ordered a large cake. He also hired a catering company to prepare food for the party and arrived just before the guests first arrived. As construction crews began preparing to pour the foundations for the new warehouse, Mark decided it was time to donate another pint of his blood and finish collecting the amount needed for his plan. As before, he applied a tourniquet, inserted a needle into the same vein, and drew another pint of blood. This time, he carefully threw the used needle and tube into a trash container near the medical clinic, hoping no one would notice. That evening, when Willa was already asleep, Mark continued his plan. He took the package of rat poison and, putting on gloves, carefully wiped off all fingerprints from it. He then used Willa's hands to leave her fingerprints on the packaging before returning the poison to a cabinet in the garage. The day of the surprise party has arrived. Mark agreed with one of Willa's relatives to come early and be at home, while Mark himself came up with an excuse to stay late. Mark didn't go to work that day. Instead, he parked around the corner, waited until Willa left the house, and then drove back. He did everything to initiate his murder, leaving traces and evidence of his own DNA throughout the house. Mark left a note on the kitchen table, in a visible place, so that it would be found. Willa, I was called urgently on business. Please celebrate your birthday without me, and we will celebrate it when I return in a week or two. The note was not signed. He also left an envelope containing documents about Willa and Dale's affair in the top drawer of his desk for the police to find. He then hid, waiting for Willa and Dale to arrive home. Willa's cousin arrived on time, as did the catering. The guests began to gather, and soon the house was filled with people. After a while, someone noticed bloody footprints on the floor, and there was a noise. Then events began to develop rapidly. A police car approached the Wallace house with sirens blaring. Mark continued to hide, watching what was happening. More and more guests arrived at the house, but now they were not allowed inside, as the police blocked the entrance. Soon another police car arrived, followed by an ambulance. A crowd of people formed and were not allowed to enter the house. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Dale and Willa arrived on the scene in Dale's pickup truck. Due to the large number of police cars, guest cars, and ambulances, they were unable to park near the house. Getting out of the car, Dale and Willa walked towards the crowd. Mark took advantage of the moment and sneaked up behind Dale's pickup, dripping a few drops of blood into the back. He also put in a roll of duct tape with a trace and a small piece of plastic that he used around the house. Having finished, Mark left, knowing that he had created quite a mess. After walking a couple of blocks, he hailed a taxi and asked to be taken to a place near the site where a new warehouse was being built. Getting out of a taxi nearby, he headed towards the construction site. The foundation had already been poured, but the concrete had not yet hardened. Mark poured a few drops of blood onto the ground and onto the formwork. He then left there on foot and headed to a small hotel. It was about 2 miles away, but Mark didn't want to leave any traces that could give him away. He paid for the room in cash. His plan was to hide for about a week and then suddenly appear again when everything was done. He hoped that the rumors and perhaps the police would lead to the whole town knowing about Willa and Dale's affair. That night, Mark slept peacefully. The next day, he bought the tablet with cash and returned to his hotel, connecting to the public Wi-Fi network. He went on social networks and began looking for party guests. One of them, Willa's cousin, was a well-known gossip, and it was she who was specially invited by Mark to come early to the party. Her post read, "I can't believe this happened. I arrived almost at the same time as the catering, and we went into the house so they could start preparing. At first, we didn't notice anything until one of the guys slipped on the floor. At this point, other guests began to arrive, and I helped serve drinks in the living room. The caterer traced the stains and found that they extended into the street but disappeared into the driveway. Then he came back into the house, grabbed my hand, and led me to the bedroom. When we opened the door, I almost lost consciousness. It seemed as if someone had been killed here. We closed the door and immediately called the police. More and more people arrived, and after the first police officer arrived, he ordered everyone inside to stay put. When the police learned that the party was being held in Willa's honor, they began asking where she was. At 7 o'clock, she appeared with Dale, smiling as if expecting a surprise party. I don't know what the others thought, but gossip and speculation were already swirling. The police immediately grabbed her and her boss, took them to their cars, and, as far as I understood, took them to the station for interrogation. We all already realized that Mark was missing. I have to say, Willa didn't know about the party, which makes her even more suspicious. It looks like she did something to Mark, but didn't have time to follow through. Mark removed the battery from his cell phone so that its location could not be tracked. He listened to the local radio station and followed the news. At noon, the news bulletin reported that Mark Wallace was missing and that Willa and Dale were considered suspects. Police held a news conference saying the investigation was just beginning and urged anyone with information about Mark Wallace to contact authorities. Mark suddenly realized that he had not taken into account one important point: his photograph would appear in the news and newspapers. Now he will have to go out in disguise. He decided to stop shaving. Mark was always clean-shaven, even when he went fishing, so the cops wouldn't expect him to grow a beard. He also understood that he needed to avoid all familiar places while he was listed as missing. Mark's appearance was ordinary enough not to attract attention, so he ventured to the nearest fast food joint for a snack. After eating, he decided to take a bus to a nearby town located on the shore of a popular fishing lake. It gave him something to do rather than just sit and wait it out in a hotel. But first he went to a thrift store and bought clothes that were suitable for fishing, but didn't look new. Settling into a small rented cabin, Mark spent his days sitting on the shore of the lake and casting his line, trying not to catch anything significant. He struck up conversations with other fishermen, each of whom talked about his missed big fish. Mark made up his own story to keep the conversation going. Every evening, he followed the news in the local newspaper and on television. The police have not made any statements, as they are always secretive in the initial stages of an investigation. But commentators are a completely different matter. They didn't mince words in condemning Willa and Dale. Somehow the press had caught wind of their affair, or at least suspected it, and now the journalists were inflating a story full of guesses that the public accepted as truth. Mark went back to cousin Willa's social media page. She wrote that Willa's parents had received threats in connection with Mark's disappearance. Mark felt sorry for them. Her parents were always kind to him and warmly welcomed him into the family. Mark's own parents died several years ago, both from cancer. This word still made Mark shiver and cry. He couldn't pronounce it out loud and always called it just S. A dark thought occurred to him. Maybe Willa will be diagnosed with cancer and Dale will get sick too. Of course, Mark knew that cancer was not contagious, but the small part of his mind that wanted revenge was building its own petty dreams and fantasies. He didn't really want Willa to die, but he did want her to suffer. Thinking about how his actions could affect innocent people like Willa's parents made him feel sad. About a week and a half later, Mark happened to see a news broadcast with a press conference from his hometown. He didn't have time to hear everything, but he realized that Willa and Dale had already been accused of murder. Realizing that charges had already been filed, Mark decided to find more information using the tablet. He did a search on Willa Wallace's name and found several articles on the local newspaper's website. Mark smiled after reading one of the articles. He forgot that the local district attorney was running for re-election and his opponent was very popular. Prosecutors are usually in no hurry to make big statements in the early stages of investigations, but in this case, the prosecutor decided to use the moment to increase his ratings, knowing that the trial would not take place until after the elections. Now he was trying to attract the attention of voters by announcing the capture of the culprits, so that this would have a positive effect on his ratings, since the trial would be after the elections. The newspaper quotes extensively. 2 weeks ago, local businessman Mark Wallace, owner of Wallace Warehouses, went missing from his home. When family and friends arrived at the home, they found evidence that something heavy had been dragged outside and was believed to have been placed in a vehicle, possibly a pickup truck, before leaving the scene. We also learned that someone had taken a shower before family and friends who were throwing a surprise birthday party for Mrs. Wallace interrupted the proceedings. DNA was found in the shower drain. Samples were sent for DNA testing, and the blood was found to belong to Mark Wallace. Due to the large number, the coroner concluded that Mr. Wallace was killed in his bed and his body was then moved. Further investigation revealed that there was a large amount of the anticoagulant warfarin, the active ingredient in rat poisons, present in the blood. Forensics found a container of rat poison in the house that bore Mrs. Wallace's fingerprints. Mrs. Wallace denied knowing about or touching the container. No further prints were found on the container. We also found a glass in the dishwasher that had not been cleaned. This glass contained the remains of rat poisons. The only prints on this glass belonged to Mark Wallace. We also found a knife in the placemat that had marks on it. These traces matched Mr. Wallace's DNA. A letter to Mrs. Wallace was found on the kitchen table, purportedly from Mr. Wallace, in which he apologized to his wife for having to leave town for a meeting with a client. It was not signed and was printed on my home computer and printer. We found no evidence that Mr. Wallace took any clothing or toiletries with him if he actually intended to leave. His car was in the garage. We interviewed his business partner, Kelly Parsons, and she confirmed that Mr. Wallace had no client meetings scheduled at this time. He has not responded to phone messages, and we are unable to trace his mobile phone. Either the battery has been removed, is completely dead, or the phone has been hidden so deep that no signal can be received. Mr. Wallace is presumed dead. The search for his body continues. As for motive, it was discovered that Mr. Wallace had evidence that Mrs. Wallace and her boss, Dale Timmons, owner of the electronics company Timmons Electronics, were engaged in a long-term affair. Moreover, an independent report submitted to our management shows that Timmons Electronics is experiencing financial difficulties and is in need of a cash injection. An investigation of Mrs. Wallace's emails revealed that a new $1 million insurance policy had recently been issued in Mr. Wallace's name. Evidence of the crime was found in Mr. Timmons' pickup truck parked at Wallace's home the night of the surprise party. Police also found a roll of tape and plastic bags in the car, which contained Mr. Wallace's DNA. Therefore, I asked the jury to return a charge of voluntary manslaughter, even though the body was not found. This is an unusual request, but our office believes that the two individuals who had motive and the greatest benefit from the murder may be attempting to flee the country, as both are frequent travelers and have valid passports. Mark finished reading the article with a satisfied smile. The newspaper also had a column discussing people who cheat on their spouses and what should be done about them. The only downside Mark saw was what would happen when he suddenly appeared alive and unharmed. Could he be charged with a crime? He needed to do something before the Daw was made a fool of himself. Mark took the bus and went to the nearest town. Then he went to a local store that sold prepaid mobile phones. Of course, they asked him for his documents, but Mark said that he had lost his wallet and phone, and he needed to contact his family to restore all the documents and get home safely. Luckily, the seller believed his story. Mark guessed that in a tourist town, situations like this might happen often enough not to arouse suspicion. Mark called the local police hotline and identified himself. The operator froze, deciding whether to believe him. Then he was switched to detective. "This is Detective Mike Rollins. Please understand that the conversation is being recorded and the call is being monitored in accordance with department policy. How can I help?" "Detective Rollins, this is Mark Wallace. I think you're looking for me in connection with an incident at my house. I want to assure you and the district attorney that I am safe and sound. I organized this whole situation myself to show my wife, her lover, and our entourage that I knew about Willa's betrayal. I understood that the police would likely be involved, but I did not expect that charges would be laid before I returned to clarify the situation. I never planned to embarrass anyone other than Willa and Dale. The detective then questioned Mark at length to make sure it was really him and not an imposter. We currently have 25 imposters on our list, the detective said. A murder case always attracts strange and unfortunate people who will do anything to get their 15 minutes of fame, even at the risk of going to jail. These poor people confessing to crimes take up a lot of police time as all leads have to be followed up. But after our conversation, I am confident that I am talking to the real Mark Wallace. Mr. Wallace, you need to report to the station. We must discuss this episode. I will inform the Dawes office as soon as possible that you are indeed alive and well. Are you in danger or have you been threatened? Mark shook his head, even though he knew Detective Rollins couldn't see it. No, Detective, I am not in danger and no one is putting pressure on me. I left town a few days after I started all this. I didn't let anyone in on my plans. This was partly to keep things a secret until I was ready to complete what I had planned, and also to ensure that no one would get involved in case I did break the law. I also did not contact a lawyer except to change the will before starting this adventure and to prevent my wife from ruining my business by taking it for herself. Mark assumed that the local police had already been alerted to his whereabouts by Detective Rollins. He was well aware that all cell phones could be tracked through the 911 system, so he continued walking down the street, not stopping while he spoke. A local bus stopped at the corner, and Mark hopped on, paying the driver. He didn't care where to go at the moment. He could always go back to the bus station and head back to his rented cabin. As soon as he sat down, a police cruiser drove by and Mark noticed the officer craning his neck, trying to find someone matching Mark's description using the phone. Detective, I know that you are tracking this cell phone and that the local police are already looking for me. I won't resist arrest if they catch me, but I'm not going to show up right now. I let you know that I am not missing or killed. I understand that the Da may be in an awkward position, but I believe that he is tactful and insightful enough to turn the situation to his advantage without looking stupid. The average citizen will understand that he was simply following the evidence and acting in the public interest. I'll turn off my phone and contact you again later. Before Detective Rollins could say anything, Mark pressed end and immediately removed the cover of the phone, taking out the battery. Now no signals could be sent. He looked out the window of the bus as it turned the corner and saw a patrol car drive by and not follow the bus. Mark got off at the next stop and asked which bus to take to get back to the bus station. Soon he was on his way to his hut again. Back at the hut, Mark took a chance and put the battery back in the phone. He didn't believe the police would be able to track him if the phone moved between cities and was only used occasionally. He called his lawyer and soon told him the whole story of what he had done. The lawyer was not happy. Mark, you could be charged with several crimes, starting with conspiracy. You yourself admitted that you knew the police would be involved and deliberately arranged for Willa and Dale to be charged. The prosecutor may even try to charge you with falsely reporting a crime because you knew the police would definitely be involved. You alienated all your friends and family who believed you were killed. Willa might even sue me because you recently changed your will and company inheritance. How can I prove that I didn't know about your plans? The lawyer continued talking for some time before regaining his composure. So what do you want to do now? Mark knew that his old friend would not be happy, so he did not try to stop him or correct him in any incorrect assumptions. At this point, I guess I need protection when contacting the DA. I'm sure Detective Rollins will brief him immediately before he even has time to hold a press conference about the jury. Mark paused, allowing the lawyer to agree with his words. Then I would like you, or someone who specializes in divorce cases, to file for divorce from Willa. I have had no contact with her or any of our friends or family, but I believe she has been excluded from society since this all happened. This was my main goal. I wanted her to be symbolically labeled with a scarlet letter for treason and for the entire community to condemn her and that idiot Dale Timmons. When the time comes, and I leave it up to you, I want Dale to be served with a lawsuit for breaking up his marriage. I don't know if his company has a policy against relationships with employees, but he should pay for having sex with my wife." Mark paused while the lawyer jotted down a few notes. "I'll probably also need someone to take the hit when I get back. I don't think I can calmly answer reporters' questions now. I'm sure they will ask very difficult questions about the whole situation, the affair, the party, what I did, and who I set up. I do not intend to answer these questions." The lawyer agreed, and they agreed on how Mark could keep in touch in case the DA tried to get a warrant to wiretap the lawyer's phone. Mark hung up and then called Kelly Parsons, his chief operating officer. "Kelly, this is Mark." Kelly immediately hung up. Mark called again through the switchboard and, after introducing himself, asked to be transferred to Kelly's office, but asked the secretary to listen and connect him again if Kelly hung up the call again. A minute or two passed before Kelly picked up the phone again. Mark assumed that the longtime secretary had convinced Kelly to talk to him because she knew the company's telephone policy. "This is Kelly Parsons. How can I help?" "Kelly, don't hang up. It would be unpleasant for me to find a replacement for you. This is Mark." "How can I be sure it's you?" Mark chuckled. "My little attempt to set someone up worked too well. I understand why you're skeptical, because it looks like I was killed in bed and someone took my body. But I assure you, I am alive and well." Kelly asked 20 questions to make sure this was really her boss and friend. When she was sure she was talking to a living Mark, she had other questions. "When will you be back? I'm guessing you're out of town. Have you contacted Willa yet?" Mark became serious. "Let me answer your questions in order. First of all, I don't know when I'll return home. My lawyer is currently talking to the DA, as I may have broken a law or two with my stunt. Hopefully, they can come to an agreement so this can end without me having to go to jail. Secondly, I don't intend to talk to Willa anytime soon. She's been cheating on me with that idiot for too long. She was just using me as a place to sleep and pay her bills while she slept with Dale." Kelly's answer was unexpected. "I would like you to talk to her. Yes, I agree that she was extremely disrespectful to you and your marriage, but the thought that you could be dead left her completely confused. I won't say she loves you, but she values you highly. She calls here almost every day. At first, I thought she was trying to take over the company, so I didn't want to talk to her. When I finally spoke to her, I found out that her entire family had turned against her because of her misdeeds and accusations that she might have been involved in your murder. She has no one to talk to. She is completely desperate and worried about you. When it turned out that you knew about her affair, she told me that she understood why everyone would think that she had something to do with your disappearance. And when the DA announced yesterday that Dale was having financial difficulties, she immediately contacted me to see if he removed you in an attempt to frame her. I guess I can understand her point of view. In fact, I only wanted to publicly humiliate her for what she did to me and to us. We struggled to get the business off the ground and make it profitable so we could start a family. Lately, she didn't even want to talk about children. We have already chosen the names. We bought a house expecting to fill the bedrooms with children. We had a plan, and she herself decided that she was more important than us. Some of the comments that were sent to me in the transcripts showed that she did not like or respect me. I was wasting my time in this relationship, and I was depressed by the thought that I might not be a father until I found another woman, and I might already be too old to enjoy fatherhood. She had to pay for it." He paused to catch his breath and calm down. He was starting to get angry. "I know it wasn't the best way to go public, but it was starting to piss me off how she treated our marriage and the possibility of ruining everything we'd built if we got divorced. Although I may lose everything this way, she will still bear the stigma of what she did to us." He paused again. "Hell, the way the media is blowing this whole thing out of proportion, she will always be the woman who may have killed her husband. When I return, the news reports will not be as scandalous as they were when I disappeared. Many people will not believe that I am alive at all and will continue to consider her a murderer." They switched to discussing company affairs, and Kelly told Mark the latest news. Construction of a large warehouse continued. Kelly wouldn't say anything about whether the crime at the construction site was of interest to the police, other than to say that the police called in high-powered radar equipment to scan all the foundations and other construction sites in search of Mark's body. The company's cash flow was fine. Willa only withdrew money from her account once to hire her lawyer. There were no more unexpected expenses. When Mark felt he was fully on top of things, he promised Kelly that he would contact Willa and let her know that he was alive. Kelly had given him an alternative number because Villa's phones, both cell and home, were overloaded with calls from people disapproving or supporting her. Yes, some people actually thought she did the right thing, or from members of the media trying to get exclusive information. Willa was also hiding somewhere in the city. She promised the district attorney that she would not try to leave town for any reason. Dale was also in hiding. He mostly received death threats. His business collapsed. Many customers have canceled orders or put them on hold until his personal issues are resolved. Gretchen filed for divorce immediately after the first news appeared in the press. Apparently, she was tired of his infidelity and was not going to stand next to her husband, who was accused of murdering his lover. She even filed a restraining order against him. Mark was glad to hear this. Mark left his phone charging after a long conversation with Kelly. The call to Willa had to be postponed until lunch. He left the phone and went to a restaurant overlooking the pier, where he had a bite to eat. Returning to the hut, Mark found that the phone was fully charged and began to dial Villa's number, but stopped. She most likely will not answer a call from an unknown number. He took out his personal phone, put the battery back in, and dialed her new number. She could see by the ID who was calling. Willa answered the third ring. She was hesitant. Mark initially wanted to mock him a little and start talking in a ghostly voice, but decided that Willa had probably suffered enough already. "Willa, this is Mark," he said, pausing to wait for her reaction. There was no answer. It was very quiet for a long time. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "Willa, are you here? This is Mark. I'm alive and unharmed." She began to sob. It was not just crying, but a complete emotional breakdown. Mark tried several times to say something, but it was obvious that she didn't hear anything at that moment. He decided to wait until she came to her senses. Finally, through hoarse sobs and tears, Willa was able to ask the question. "Mark, is it really you? You sound like him, but so do the others. How can I be sure?" Mark reminded her of their first date when they got caught in the rain. They never told anyone about this incident. "Oh, Mark, it really is you. You said something about others sounding like me. What happened?" "They called me several times over the past week. Some calls were even from your number, and a couple of times from your home phone number. I think this is the work of a hacker. Each time, a ghostly voice, a little like yours, accused me of murder. It drove me crazy. The only reason I answered this call is because Kelly called me a few minutes ago and said you were alive and you were going to call me." She paused, then probably put the phone down to dry her eyes and blow her nose. When she picked up the phone again, she continued. "I was shocked when she called. With all the evidence, I was already beginning to believe that they really killed you and hid your body. I even blamed Dale for this. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was innocent." Before Mark could say anything, she continued. "I don't know whether I should be happy that you're alive or angry at you for what you did to me and to us. I want to hug you and shake you at the same time. If I yell at you, it will only be because I was very worried about you and was afraid that you were dead. At the same time, I want to understand why you did this. Why, Mark, have I really treated you that badly?" Mark knew this conversation would quickly go downhill. He needed to make one last comment and end the conversation. "First of all, Willa, you slept with Dale, your boss. Secondly, you didn't even want to think about children. Thirdly, our sex life has become a nightmare. Fourth, you seem to have used our house only as a place to sleep and shelter from the elements while you did your job and continued your affair with Dale. You didn't care about anything we ever planned. You didn't trust me anymore. The only thing you were interested in was how the business was going so you wouldn't have to worry about money. You let him do things to you that you never let me do. She tried to object, but Mark hung up and turned off the phone. He then took the battery out again and put the phone in his bag. Mark felt very tired. Even his bones ached. He realized he had been tense all day, first driving into town, then calling Detective Rowlands, then playing cat and mouse with the local police, and then returning to the cabin. The calls after his return finally finished him off. He decided to take a nap. When Mark woke up, it was already dark. He went to the restaurant and ate a light dinner. While eating, he tried to decide what to do next. He got bored here. Fishing was good for a short time, but he couldn't stay here forever. It was time to move on. Returning to the hut, he turned on the TV. He was never a big television fan, but always loved sports and news. He checked the local news to see if the district attorney had announced that Mark was alive, but there was no mention of his case in today's news. Mark suggested that the prosecutor was still figuring out how to present the situation in a way that didn't make him look stupid for being duped. He flipped through the TV program, looking for something interesting, and settled on an old rerun of The Fugitive. Mark thought he might get some ideas since the show was about a man convicted of murder, moving from town to town trying to clear his name and avoid getting caught. Maybe he should have done the same. He still had most of the $10,000 in cash. Unlike in the 1960s, when the series aired, he had access to the internet, credit cards, and, thanks to a major national bank, his money anywhere. He could maintain contact with his lawyer from anywhere in the world. Same with Kelly, she could contact him at any time. She was an excellent businesswoman, and Mark was confident that she could handle running the company. Any new contracts could be signed through FedEx if required. Mark could fly in to meet a potential client and then fly out again without attracting police attention. The next morning, Mark went online and began planning his long trip. He decided to head to the East Coast first. Many historical attractions of the country are concentrated there. Mark has always dreamed of visiting Boston and Baltimore, as well as Washington, D.C. Hell, he could spend a whole month just at the Smithsonian. By lunchtime, he was ready to leave. Mark gave his rod and reel to a boy who often hung around the dock. The boy looked sad and hungry and claimed that he loved fishing, but could not afford to buy equipment. Mark gave him all his equipment. The boy was delighted. Mark then bought a bus ticket. He planned to use a bus to get to the nearest city with an international airport. From there, he could fly anywhere. Mark spent the next year traveling. He stayed in each city for a week or more. Tired of motels and hotels, he finally bought a large class motorhome and used it as a mobile home. He would travel to new cities, find a good RV campsite, rent a car, and start exploring. Mark visited museums and parks and went to sporting events of all kinds, professional, college, or even high school games. It didn't matter to him where the events took place. Sometimes he would go to bars or pubs to meet the locals. He never drank too much, but was willing to pay for drinks if the situation called for it. Sometimes he started relationships with local women. He avoided married ladies because he didn't want to do to anyone what date did to him. He would have fleeting affairs for 1 or 2 nights, sometimes 3, before moving on. Mark did not plan to enter into a long-term relationship until he resolved all the issues related to his past life. Meanwhile, Willa resisted the divorce. She requested family counseling. Mark's lawyer agreed, but said that no one knew where Mark was, so the judge decided not to press the issue. Willa demanded a larger stake in the company, claiming that she, too, suffered along with Mark, especially in the beginning, when they were trying to get the business back on its feet. Mark's lawyer countered that the company was incorporated in such a way that Willa was only in an advisory role. She could sell her share, but could not demand that the company itself be sold. He presented the original documents, which contained her consent, confirmed by her signature. The court ruled that the company must pay Willa her share of the profits quarterly. This provided her with a comfortable life, but did not allow her to lead an overly luxurious lifestyle. Mark also gave Willa the house and cars, as well as everything in the house. The house had a nice collection of guns and antiques that Willa had amassed over the years. The value of the property was significant. Willa also inherited Dale's position at Timmins Electronics. Dale disappeared without a trace when his financial fraud was revealed. The Securities and Exchange Commissioner was looking for him on other matters. When Dale disappeared, there was no one left to lead the company, and Willa took over. She led the company out of a financial crisis, and the board of directors fully supported her. She was earning an excellent salary and no longer needed to ruin Mark's company to maintain her standard of living. Through a lawyer, Mark learned that Willa simply wanted a private meeting to make her point. Mark finally agreed. He returned to the city the same way he left, by bus. He parked his motorhome 100 miles outside of town in a national forest and then took a taxi to the bus station. At the end of the bus route, Mark got back into the taxi to get to the large hotel where the meeting with Willa was to take place. He arrived early enough to have time to look around and make sure no one was following him. Mark wasn't too worried about the police, but he didn't want to take any chances. He knew there were still charges against him, but the old district attorney had lost the election, and the new one was up to his neck in gang and drug cases that culminated in a nightclub shooting that killed 8 people. The man and his team worked late into the night trying to bring the culprits to justice. Mark was a small fish, and his story was an embarrassment to the previous administration, not the current one. Mark entered the hotel, met with his lawyer, and they headed to a small meeting room where the meeting was scheduled. Willa and her lawyer soon joined them. After exchanging greetings, everyone sat down at the table, and each was given a drink of their choice. Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs, sipping his coffee and staring intently at his wife. Willa looked fine, but seemed older and a little worn out. Mark guessed that the stress of the new job was taking its toll on her. Willa, in turn, studied the man she had been married to for many years, but now he seemed almost a stranger. He was slimmer, but looked in good shape. He had a neatly trimmed beard, and his hair was longer than usual, but well-groomed. He was not dressed in a suit and tie as before, but in clean khakis and a neat button-down shirt. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "You caused this meeting, so come on, start talking." Willa glanced quickly at her lawyer. After his nod, she cleared her throat and began. "Mark, first of all, I want to apologize for hurting you. That was never my intention when I started dating Dale outside of the office. It's not your fault. I think we just started working more and eventually we started having dinner together. This led to us ending up in bed. He wasn't better than you in bed, and he wasn't bigger than you. He was just different." While Willa spoke, Mark pulled out a small notepad and began scribbling notes on the page. He continued to record while she spoke. She continued, "I still love you and want to save our marriage. I think we can overcome this. I have asked for couples counseling and believe our marriage will be even stronger than it was before. Now I understand that cheating hurts everyone. You can return to our house immediately. I didn't change anything. All your things are in place. We'll be happy again, you'll see." Mark continued to take notes on his page. Finally, he stopped and said, "Yes, as I thought. You've used almost every excuse in the cheater's handbook. The only thing you didn't say was, 'It's not you, it's me.' And another phrase, you never complained about the lack of attention. I would just like to ask about the children we were planning to have. We're already a full year older since I last asked this question." He showed her a paper on which he wrote down various excuses and explanations found on the internet about the reasons for cheating. Most of the items on the page were marked. Willa turned pale. She was used to negotiating contracts and usually came out the winner, very confident. Just last week, she struck a lucrative deal with Kelly Parsons to lease warehouse space for Timmins Electronics. "I just thought we were a little old for kids. Besides, my job is very stressful. This is a full-time job requiring 60-80 hours per week. I just don't have time." Her voice trailed off, realizing that her honest answer was not what Mark had expected. "Well, Willa," Mark said, "we really have a dead end. I found that I could run our company by hiring the best people for day-to-day work and only be available for urgent issues or large contracts. You decided that Timmons Electronics couldn't exist without you every minute of the day. I really don't understand why I would come back. I'll see you even less than when you slept with Dale, and the sex will probably be even worse." Mark stood up, realizing that the negotiations were over. Find yourself another stallion for pleasure in the office. That's all you need. He did not wait for an answer, but left the room and headed towards the bus station. Mark was a little surprised that Willa didn't try to stop him, despite her words about her great love for him. He did not waste time thinking, but confidently walked into his future. His intention was to call his lawyer as soon as he was on the bus and ask him to continue with the divorce proceedings. Mark was at peace with himself and ready for life as a bachelor. Once he is completely free, he can put down roots somewhere and start looking for a woman who will complement his lifestyle. As soon as he entered the small waiting room at the bus station, he heard a voice behind him. "Sorry, sir. Are you Mark Wallace, by any chance?" Mark turned to the patrolman. "Yes, I'm Mark Wallace. Did something happen?" "Sir, you are under arrest for false reporting and conspiracy to commit false charges against Willa Wallace and Dale Timmons. Please put your hands on your head and face the wall, sir." Mark obeyed and put his hands on his head. He didn't think the new daw would be looking for him. Willa probably called the police when he left their meeting. Soon he was handcuffed and then searched. After that, he was taken to the police station and detained. He was then placed in a holding cell until he was sent to prison. No one asked him questions or tried to talk to him. In prison, he was photographed and fingerprinted, after which he was back in his cell, awaiting a meeting with a lawyer. He did not have to put on a prison jumpsuit because the officer accompanying him told him he would simply have to post bail and then be released. Mark's lawyer soon appeared and assured him that he had already contacted the assistant district attorney. He offered a plea deal that would have avoided prison time and limited him to a minimum probation period. He was confident that this deal would be accepted and that Mark would be able to get out of the situation with minimal consequences. Mark agreed to this plan. He was then taken to a bail hearing. Since it was only a preliminary hearing, the judge asked several questions. The biggest question was whether Mark was a flight risk. Mark answered honestly that he is actually homeless, since his motorhome is his only home, and it is not considered a full-fledged home. He promised to move the camper van to a local campsite to avoid breaching his bail conditions. Suddenly, another lawyer approached the judge. "Your Honor, may I address you? I introduce Willa Wallace, Mark's wife. She has a place of residence in the city, and she is ready to post the full amount of bail, assuring the court that Mark will not try to escape. Moreover, she asks that he be placed under house arrest with an electronic bracelet to confirm his willingness to comply with the terms of his bail." Mark grimaced as he looked at his lawyer. He would never agree to house arrest in the same house as Willa. He suggested that Villa was furious and wanted revenge on him for the public humiliation he had inflicted on her. Being under her supervision and on a bracelet was not in his best interest. The judge considered Willa's lawyer's proposal. Mark nudged his lawyer and whispered a few words to him. The lawyer nodded and spoke. "Your Honor, my client appreciates his wife's offer of residency and bail, but he believes it is not in his best interest. Your Honor may not remember the events that brought us here, but my client feels this may be a ploy by his wife to avenge the humiliation he caused her when he exposed her affair with her boss. My client respectfully requests that the court consider other bail conditions. He is ready to surrender his passport and agrees to an electronic bracelet, but not in his former home and not under the supervision of his wife. Is your client willing to risk imprisonment if I don't agree with him?" "Yes, Your Honor. My client is prepared to be confined to a general prison cell and requests a speedy trial as soon as possible." "Clear. I'm calling a break. I ask the lawyers to meet me in my office." With that, the judge slammed his gavel and headed into his office, leading with him the prosecutor, Mark's lawyer, and Willa's representative. They were gone for about 15 minutes, while Mark had to just sit and be bored under the watchful gaze of the bailiff. Finally, the lawyers returned. Willa's lawyer didn't look very happy. This reassured Mark. Mark's lawyer took him to a quiet place outside to discuss the situation. The bailiff went with them, but did not handcuff Mark. When they were alone, the lawyer spoke. "Mark, the judge is sympathetic. He even laughed when he was reminded of what you did to prank your wife and her lover. The prosecutor also wants the case to be resolved quickly and quietly. He has more important things to do that distract him. He doesn't want to take the case to court. Are you willing to plead guilty if the judge then suspends your sentence and gives you probation?" Mark thought about it. He was guilty and knew that if he was convicted, he could end up in prison. He nodded in agreement, and they returned to the courtroom. His lawyer spoke with the prosecutor, and the judge reopened the hearing. Mark stood up and pleaded guilty to the charge of false reporting. The judge sentenced Mark to a $1,000 fine and a year of probation. From that moment on, Mark became a free man. Mark went through the process of being released from prison and called Kelly Parsons. "Kelly, I will have to stay in the city for a year while I serve my probation. Please arrange for my motorhome to be delivered here. Also, do we have available housing?" "Mark, I have a suitable place. I used last year's profits to buy a small luxury apartment building. We rent out 4 apartments and reserve 2 for our guests. Both are 2-room, fully furnished. All you have to do is choose which one you want, and I will arrange everything." Mark thanked his director of operations, and his lawyer drove him to the 3-story house. He chose the apartment that he liked best. It was located on the 3rd floor, was very spacious, and furnished with expensive furniture. After Mark called Kelly back and told him which apartment he had chosen, a courier soon arrived with groceries and a case of beer. Later that day, his employees, who had volunteered to pick up his mobile home, dropped him off. Mark also arranged for a car to be delivered to make it easier for him to get around the city. He moved some clothes and his computer from the mobile home to the apartment, and soon everything was ready. Mark spent the evening quietly in his new home, and the next morning he went to the office. It had been several months since he last visited his business, and he was pleased with the upgrades and updates that Kelly had completed while he was on vacation. Old employees came to greet him, and new ones were introduced to him. Most of the new people were very quiet when they met. Kelly smiled and told Mark that the entire staff had heard about the incident at the Wallace house, and the newbies were delighted with how Mark had exposed and punished Willa and Dale. A serious conversation began at work. Kelly began. "What are your plans for the company? Are you going back to management? If yes, what will happen to me?" Mark answered honestly with a smile. "Kelly, you did a great job, maybe even better than me. The company is thriving and even expanding. I know we have several more large clients on the horizon who are interested in our buildings for large inventory storage and possibly a new distribution center. I have a couple of ideas to take us to the next level that I want to discuss with you. As for going back to management, I'm not sure I want that. I've enjoyed my time in the business remotely and trust you to make smart decisions that will help us remain profitable. By the way, we need to talk about how to keep you here. Would a share in a corporation help me understand how important you are to me?" Kelly smiled at her boss. She was sure that he would not leave her on the street, but the offer of a share in the business became a pleasant incentive to stay and continue working in the team. They discussed options, as well as Mark's idea of expanding the company to other cities and replicating their success. They developed a plan to find vacant or abandoned properties to purchase and begin expansion. Mark insisted that Kelly remain in charge while he helped find new clients once the warehouses were up and running in the next target city. But Kelly introduced an unexpected twist. "Mark, I want to remain your CEO or coup as you decide, but I need time to start a family. My husband and I have been waiting for the right time to have a baby for a long time, and I am happy to announce that I am 6 weeks pregnant. If you don't mind, could you take over the company until I'm ready to come back?" Mark wasn't sure he wanted to dive back into running a business, but Kelly was invaluable, and he suppressed his doubts, smiled wider, and said, "Of course, that suits me. I'll keep an eye on your chair until you need to get the new Parsons heir back on his feet." Kelly hugged him. "By the way, how about you become his or her godfather?" To say that Mark was touched by the request would be a gross understatement. He was speechless for a moment before smiling and happily saying yes. He hugged her tightly and wished her all the best in motherhood. In the following weeks, Mark was brought up to speed with the company and presented Kelly's ideas for local expansion. He approved of them all. Since Willa was a co-owner, she also needed to see all the plans, and she did not express any particular doubts about them. Willa repeatedly tried and used different, sometimes unexpected, methods to get Mark to sit down with her and try to revive their marriage. But she failed every time. She eventually managed to convince a judge to order mandatory marriage counseling. Mark couldn't challenge it, or he could have gone to jail for contempt of court, which could have jeopardized his probation. Mark could not choose a consultant, so he assumed that the specialist Willa chose would be completely on her side, ignoring his wishes and interests. He was pleasantly surprised when he met with Dr. Marcia McClellan alone. She immediately said that she had already had a meeting with Willa, and that the meeting was productive, but she had no right to reveal the details of their conversation. Likewise, she could not discuss with Willa what Mark would tell her in a private meeting. Dr. McClellan asked Mark questions about how she and Willa met, his upbringing, school and life experiences, and what motivates him in life. Finally, she asked about the events that led to their breakup. However, she never mentioned the publicity of the party and the exposure of Willa and Dale's relationship. At the end of the session, Mark felt that the consultant was indeed neutral and not hostile, as he had expected. She never interrupted him except when she needed to clarify something, and she never gave the impression that she was judging him for the way he had set up Willa's revelation. Her only question was why he did not allow the case to go to trial. Mark honestly admitted that while he hated what Willa did to their relationship, he couldn't let her be convicted and sent to prison when she was innocent of what she was accused of. "I'm sorry that the setup I orchestrated damaged her relationships with her family and friends. I didn't see this coming. I just wanted to punish her for what she did to us, or rather to me," he said. After the end of the session, Mark felt empty. He returned home, although it was still early, poured himself a couple of shots of his favorite bourbon, and rested for the rest of the day. Between sessions, he sent staffers to scout properties in other cities for the proposed expansion. Due to the terms of his probation, he could not leave the city, so he had to delegate these tasks. This benefited both him and his employees. Mark learned to trust his people, and they gained new experience. The first session with Willa was tense. Willa wanted to sit next to Mark, but he chose a place where he could see both her and Dr. McClellan without turning his head. He needed to watch their body language and listen carefully to Willa. Dr. McClellan began by asking them to talk about how they first met and what their first dates were like. It made them remember the good times. She skillfully asked questions about when each of them became aware of their feelings and how their relationship developed. She asked them to talk about the details of the wedding and how they felt, both positive and negative, about the ceremony. In her years of practice, Dr. McClellan has learned that many long-term problems in marriages begin with excessive expectations of the perfect wedding ceremony. Typically, men wanted a simple ceremony to celebrate their love, while for most women, the wedding became a self-centered event where the groom was almost in the background. She was happy to note that in their case, there was no strong conflict of characters at the wedding. This conversation took up most of the first session. At the end, Dr. McClellan gave them the task of making a list of disappointments in their marriage, starting with the moment when each of them felt that their relationship began to fade. After the session, Willa again tried to persuade Mark to return home, but he simply went to his car. He had to leave her because she tried to stalk him. For the sake of his peace of mind, he didn't want her to know where he lived. In their next session together, Mark began talking about when their marriage began to fade, pointing out Willa's lack of communication, her staying late at work, and finally, her lack of expression of any feelings: hugs, kisses, bedtime conversations, and sex. Mark said this went on for months until he hired a private investigator to investigate. Willa had completely the opposite opinion about what their relationship was like before her infidelity. According to her, they were still a loving couple, and sex with Dale did not threaten her marriage or reflect her feelings for Mark. Mark had expected this reaction, as Willa seemed to believe that he should forgive and forget all the hurt she had caused him. Then he pulled out a portable DVD player and pressed play. The screen played one of Willa's post-sex conversations with Dale in which she insulted Mark. Dale said something and Willa continued. "I don't know why I even married him. I almost filed for divorce when he left your job and started running a warehouse business because we had no money for a long time. My work with you kept us afloat. I should probably leave him to be free for you." Dale replied, "Have you already deprived him of sex, as I asked? I don't want to be second to your pathetic husband. Baby, I keep myself pure just for you." Mark paused the playback and looked at Willa. She had a look of shock on her face and shook her head, not believing what was happening. "You say these words, but I know something else. You claim to love me, but I can't understand how you can think that way about me and still want me to come back to your home. The only thing I can think of is that you are planning some kind of humiliation on me to get revenge for the way I exposed you and Dale." He turned to Dr. McClellan. "Sorry, doctor, but I see no further need for your services. Willa lives in a world of illusions where she can do no wrong, and I should be grateful for the crumbs she throws at me. She doesn't need a loving husband, she just needs a doormat." Dr. McClellan sadly acknowledged his findings. "Unless Willa makes serious and dramatic concessions, there will be no progress." "I agree with you, Mark. I will suggest that you both continue with individual sessions, as I think you both need time to heal." Mark nodded to Willa and Dr. McClellan and then left the office. He felt he needed to get back to work and ask his staff about the results of their search for new expansion sites. Willa followed him into the warehouse, still hoping to talk. Mark shrugged and led her into a small study room where they could have some privacy without sitting too close to each other. Few of the staff knew who Willa was, so rumors began to spread when Mark closed the door to a private conversation. No one was going to bother them until Mark opened the door. "This is the last one, Willa. This is the last meeting. Say what you want, then go away and let me get back to work." Willa looked at his hard, unwavering expression. Over the years, she had seen Mark in different states. When he was happy, when he was satisfied after sex, when he was tired or irritated because of work, when he was angry because things weren't going the way he planned, and even when he was saddened, almost like a beaten puppy, when she refused to discuss the children. But she had never seen such a look before. He looked as if his body was carved out of granite, and he was also cold and indifferent. She took a deep breath and tried to save their marriage, although somewhere deep down she knew that it was already a lost cause. "I'm really sorry you had to hear those comments. I never wanted you to hear these conversations. I certainly didn't think that way about you or our marriage." All these words were said just to feed Dale's ego. He insisted on this at the beginning of our affair. He wanted to control our lives. He was the one who insisted that I stop having sex with you. He came up with the idea for me to push you away, showing indifference to you and your attempts to get closer. At the time, I took it as a kind of joke. I was having fun with Dale, and you were getting me, just lying in bed so you could relieve the tension. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but we laughed more than once about how bad it must have been for you. If it was possible, Mark's expression became even more unreadable. Willa didn't see how her words hurt him, destroying his ego. The only thing that kept him from showing how much she, once the love of his life, was destroying him from the inside was the fact that over the past year, numerous women had sought his company while he traveled across the country. None of his mistresses expressed dissatisfaction with his sexual abilities. In fact, it was Mark who ended the relationship each time by his own decision. She paused to give herself a break, choking back sobs of despair as she realized how much she was probably hurting him. But she needed to continue. She completely burst into tears for several minutes before she could continue. "That night, the night of that surprise birthday, Dale told me that you were planning something. We laughed about how unsuspecting you must be to ask him to keep me away until the right moment. We had sex in his office, on his couch, several times. She stopped when she noticed the look of complete disgust on Mark's face. There was no telling what was better, his petrified face or that look of disgust that had returned to his face. As if acknowledging Mark's unspoken condemnation, she continued, "Yes, I admit, at the time it seemed like a funny prank, but now, looking back, I understand that it was humiliating and cruel to the person I once loved." She took a deep breath and continued, "When we arrived at the house, we were laughing and joking about how we had fooled you. I was especially pleased with myself. After all, I was getting great pleasure on the side, and you were giving me a holiday. I was thinking about what an expensive gift you prepared for me. When we got out of the pickup truck, I didn't even pay attention to how many people were standing on the street near the house. I was so self-absorbed that I didn't think about why no one was hiding, as is usually the case at surprise parties." She sobbed. "And then we approached the crowd. There were so many rumors about what happened. The only thing everyone seemed to know was that you were missing." Willis shook her head. "At first I was in denial. We talked to several people. At first they wished me a happy birthday, but then, as the rumors got worse, people started moving away from us and whispering to each other. At one point, someone asked us directly, 'What did you do with his body?'" She burst into tears again for a few moments. "That's when I started to really worry." More and more police arrived. Some people began to disperse. One of the officers approached us after we were pointed out and started asking questions. I asked about you, but he couldn't or wouldn't tell me anything about you. He just kept asking where we were earlier that evening. Of course, we couldn't say we had sex in an empty office, but that's exactly what we were doing while you were allegedly being attacked and kidnapped. I started to feel sick." She swallowed. "I think you know what you wanted me to feel." And I felt it. My husband, the man I once promised to love and be faithful to, was missing, presumed seriously injured or even dead, while I was acting as a prostitute by having illicit sex with my boss. And then a detective showed up, took us into custody, and took us to the police station for questioning. That's when I found out that you knew about my relationship with Dale. They found a folder of evidence in his desk. The detective made sure I heard every recording and watched every video that showed how badly I treated you." Willa burst into tears again. When she was able to calm down, she continued, "I was completely devastated. I believed that you were killed, and they accused me of killing you and hiding your body. They kept asking questions about Dale's money. They showed me the new insurance policy that I supposedly took out for you. I was so shocked by this accusation that I couldn't think straight. Finally, I asked the lawyer to stop questioning me." We paused, and Mark brought her a glass of water. She thanked him and continued, "There was so much speculation on their part about what happened to you that I even began to doubt whether Dale was involved in your disappearance. They started asking how the business was doing, both ours and Dale's business. I knew where Dale was when you were supposedly attacked, but at some point I wondered if he had hired someone to kill you. This insurance policy would have helped him, as I learned later." She looked at Mark with despair. "I lived in hell that week. My husband, the man I truly loved, was presumed dead. I was grieving but had no support from my family. My own family believed the rumors and gossip that I was involved in your disappearance. I couldn't go outside, but it was impossible to stay at home either. When I walked into our bedroom, all I could see were traces of your DNA, as the tests confirmed. Where did you get so much blood from?" She sighed and continued. "And then the police came again and started asking about rat poisons. I didn't even know there was poison in our house, but there were only my prints on the packaging. I was going crazy. I knew I didn't hurt you, but I wasn't sure about Dale anymore. He was losing weight from lack of sleep and appetite, just like me. But, and this is the main thing, we didn't talk to him anymore. I only talked to him about work, and then only if it was absolutely necessary." She sighed. "Gretchen kicked him out of the house and was going to file for divorce. Orders for Timmins products began to be canceled, first locally and then nationally. Then the district attorney announced that he was going to convene a grand jury to bring charges. No one even offered to officially declare you dead, but I was threatened with trial for your murder." She burst into tears again. You, you hated me so much that you wanted to completely destroy me." Her face looked so lost and desperate that Mark at that moment deeply regretted what he had done. She looked down at her hands folded on the table. "You succeeded. No one at work, no one from my family, and certainly no one from your family wanted to talk to me. I found myself isolated from everyone. When I came home to pick up my things, there was always graffiti on the door. They wrote the same thing on it, that I was a murderer and that I should die." She shuddered and sighed heavily again. Phone calls started. I changed my number several times. I think one of the store employees gave my new number to everyone who asked, because the calls only stopped for a short time and then started again. The worst of them were when they called from your number and whispered, "How could you kill me, Willa? How could you do this?" Sometimes I was hysterical. I called Kelly and she tried to calm me down, but I know she hated me too. She was your friend and co-worker, not mine. She shuddered and took a deep breath. "And then you showed up. You called me. I was so happy that I couldn't wait to meet you. I wanted you to come home safe and sound. I wanted to kiss you, hug you, yell at you, cry, laugh, scream, sit quietly and look at you, ask for forgiveness, and at the same time scold you for scaring me so much. I wanted it all at the same time. But no, you just said you were alive and left again. Kelly didn't tell me where you are. New rumors have appeared. Some said that you were actually dead and that I had imagined your return to distract attention from what we had done." She stopped and looked at Mark with disappointment. "I know that you sometimes come to the city secretly. I think it's to solve problems in the warehouse. But you never called me. You didn't come home. You didn't try to contact me in any way. Luckily, you left me with access to some funds so I could pay the mortgage on my house. And then Dale left town. Timmons Electronics nearly went out of business. I had to take charge, and thank God, I was able to keep her afloat." Now it was the turn, as it seemed to Mark, of her last words. "You finally returned and suddenly demanded that I agree to have children. But I'm too busy keeping Timmons' business afloat to even think about pregnancy. What kind of life could our child expect if I worked 16 to 18 hours a day? Please tell me, how can I raise a family in such conditions? 100 people depend on my ability to run the company. Their families demand that I do my job. Our clients expect me to sacrifice my personal life for success." She spoke passionately. Mark gave her credit for that. Finally, she began to calm down. "I just want my husband and our marriage back." "Is that really that much? Can't you forgive me and let us love each other again?" She extended her hands to Mark, but he did not answer. He didn't move away, but he didn't take a step forward either. Their hands never met. "Is it my turn to speak now?" Mark restrained his anger. Willa nodded. She saw that his face remained as hard as if carved from stone. His lips barely moved as he spoke. She was not comforted by the softness of his voice. "You say you want to bring our marriage and me back into the house, but what do you really mean? Do you want a marriage where we discuss our future and children? Or that marriage from a year ago when you only came home to sleep after having sex with your boss every day?" Mark raised his hand to stop her attempt to answer. "No, don't answer. I gave you the opportunity to speak. Now it's your turn to listen." Willa leaned back. Mark continued. "You say you want to be married to me, but at the same time you say you need to work 16 to 18 hours a day to keep Timmons Electronics afloat and keep the employees, their families, and customers happy. Where does a husband fit into this equation? I guess you sleep sometimes." Willa nodded. Mark didn't stop. "What kind of life does that leave me as your husband? What should I do, sit and wait, like a devoted dog, for you to pat me on the head and throw me a bone? No, it won't happen. I'm willing to help as much as I can, but I'm not going to be secondary in this relationship." "I don't give a damn about Timmons Electronics," Mark continued. "If this business requires your constant attention 16 to 18 hours a day, maybe it deserves to fail. Dale, after all, never spent that much time on it, even though it was his project and his main responsibility. He always had time to make his wife feel loved, and at the same time he still had time to be with you every day. Why then are your vice presidents needed? Don't they do some of the work? I think you should reconsider your management structure and get rid of the dead weight. He stood up. And the last thing, I want intimacy, conversations before bed, quiet time to connect with my wife. I want to be able to discuss everything with her, from the smallest details to world events. I want to show her through words, actions, and thoughts that I love her. Even if I never become a father, I want a life outside of work. I want to be able to take vacations and not be chained to the office, and I don't want my wife to be chained to her desk. I need a wife, not a roommate. I'm not going to be second best in this relationship. Mark opened the door. I admit that you sometimes have desires. It sounds like you really wanted sex with Dale, even though you didn't want sex with me. So why don't you hire a gigolo man to be at your beck and call? He can have sex with you whenever you want. Your life will become much easier. And if you need someone's warmth at night, get a dog. The dog is much more loyal and forgives better than me. Willa was just sitting there when Mark left the room. Now she was completely crushed. She only had Timmons Electronics instead of a family. What if Mark is right, and all her efforts to save the company were empty? Who would care if she sacrificed her health and family for the sake of a corporation? Did Timmons Electronics produce anything unique that was not on the market? Willa felt much older than 38 years old as she stood up and walked toward the exit. No one she knew stood in her way of the business she and Mark owned. This was another moment that confirmed Mark's words about family. She was a co-owner of a successful business, but only knew the other co-owner and the director of operations. It was a sobering moment. Was she really putting too much energy and time into a company that wasn't even entirely hers? Willa made a mental note to see if she could get a shelter dog. Her house was too empty without Mark. Perhaps with a dog that needed care, she would want to come home again. In the days following this meeting, when everything was finally clarified, Willa stopped trying to win Mark back. Their lawyers met and made a deal. Willa eventually sold her stake to Wallace Warehouses for a certain amount. This allowed Mark to transfer 10% of the business to Kelly Parsons. Mark handled the day-to-day management while Kelly went through pregnancy and birth. Kelly was away from work for a full 12 weeks after the baby was born. Her son, whom she and her husband named James Mark Parsons after Kelly's husband and boss, was everyone's joy. Mark accepted his role as godfather, although Willa was named the boy's godmother. Willa adored her new godson. Did she regret not having her own children? No one will ever know, but she agreed to be the godmother of any subsequent child, or even to be called aunt. Over time, she realized that she needed to hire the right people and delegate some responsibility in order to have time for herself. She rarely went on dates, but sometimes she had young lovers to satisfy her sexual needs. When Kelly returned to work and Mark successfully completed his probation, he began traveling again. His motorhome logged many miles as Mark traveled as a tourist and as a businessman, exploring new locations for warehouse expansion. Sometimes he met women with whom he spent a night or two, but he was in no hurry to look for new love. First of all, he learned to be alone without feeling alone. He has become self-sufficient and independent of another person to achieve happiness or satisfaction. This took the pressure off of looking for a new relationship. He could relax and allow a potential relationship to develop without stress. Several years have passed. His business continued to expand. Sometimes Mark returned home for private meetings with Kelly and other executives. This allowed him to stay abreast of changes and potential expansion opportunities. It also reminded employees who the owner of the company was. Mark tried to ensure that such meetings did not become a cause for stress, but were simply working moments to maintain contact with the company. These trips also allowed Mark to get to know his godson and goddaughter better. Yes, Kelly decided not to limit herself to one child and not to raise James alone. Each of her pregnancies meant that Mark would temporarily take over the company again while Kelly was on vacation. Mark took the kids camping, visited local theme parks, taught them how to play baseball, watched their soccer games, and wondered why there was so much fuss about the sport, and attended countless barbecues. He had to deal politely with Willa when she was present at family events, and he realized that it wasn't that difficult. Did Mark ever get married and have children of his own? Since this is not the full story of his life, maybe yes, maybe not. But he certainly didn't regret how he exposed his wife and her lover. It was a great stunt, and it completely ruined their relationship. Overall, it was a great prank. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.